Mouton Duvernay said he suffered unjustly at least, considering all circumstances. He did not deserve it more than another. He hung up upon the flanks of my little army for 2 days, and his intentions were for the king, but everyone joined me. The enthusiasm was astonishing. I might have entered Paris with 400,000 men if I had liked. What is still more surprising, and I believe unparalleled in history, is that it was effected without any conspiracy. There was no plot, no understanding with any of the generals in France. Not one of them knew my intentions. In my proclamations consisted the whole of my conspiracy. With them, I affected everything. With them, I led the nation. Not even Massena knew of my intention. When he was informed of my having landed with a few hundred men, he disbelieved it and pronounced it impossible, thinking that if I had entertained such a project, I should have made him acquainted with it. The Bourbons wanted to make it appear that a conspiracy existed in the army, which is the reason they have shot Mouton Duvernay, Ney, and others, because my having effected what I did, not by the aid of a conspiracy or by force, as not a musket was fired, but by the general wish of the nation, reflects such disgrace upon them. There was never yet, continued Napoleon, a king who was more the sovereign of the people than I was. If I were not possessed of the smallest talent, I could reign easier in France than Louis and the Bourbons, endowed with the greatest abilities. The mass of the French nation hate the old nobles and the priests. I have not sprung from the ancien noblesse, ancient nobility, nor have I ever too much encouraged the priests. The French nation have predominant in them la vanità, la leggerezza, la independencia e il capriccio, with an unconquerable passion for glory. They will as soon do without bread as without glory, and a proclamation will lead them, les entraîner. Unlike England, where the inhabitants of a whole county may be inflamed by and will follow the opinion of 2 or 3 noble families, they must be themselves courted. Some young and ignorant peasants, continued Napoleon, who were born since the Revolution, were conversing with some older and better informed men about the Bourbons. Who are those Bourbons, said one. What are they like? Why, replied one of the older men, they are like that old ruined chateau which you see near our village. Like it, their time is past and gone. They are no longer of the age. The Bourbons will find, added he, that their caressing the marshals and generals will not answer. They must caress the people. To them they must address themselves. Unless they adopt some measures to render themselves popular, you will see a terrible explosion burst forth in France. The nation will never bear to live debased and humiliated as it is at present. When I hear of a nation living without bread, then I will believe that the French will exist without glory. At Waterloo, not a single soldier betrayed me. Whatever treason there was existed among the generals, and not among the soldiers or the regimental officers. These last were acquainted with each other's sentiments and purged themselves by turning out such as they suspected. Your nation, continued Napoleon, is chiefly guided by interest in all its actions. I have found, since I have fallen into your hands, that you have no more liberty than other countries. I have paid dearly for the romantic and chivalrous opinion which I had formed of you. Here I repeated nearly what I had said upon former occasions. Napoleon shook his head and replied, I recollect that Paoli, who was a great friend to your nation, in fact, who was almost an Englishman, said on hearing the English extolled as the most generous, the most liberal, and the most unprejudiced nation on earth. Softly, you go too far. They are not so generous nor so unprejudiced as you imagine. They are very self-interested. They are a nation of merchants and generally have gain in view. Whenever they do anything, they always calculate what profit they shall derive from it. They are the most calculating people in existence. This Paoli said, not without at the same time having given you credit for the good national qualities which you really possess. Now, I believe that Paoli was right. Napoleon then made some remarks upon Longwood, expressed his surprise that some person had not made a contract to bring a supply of water to it and to the camp, stipulating that he should be permitted to establish a garden in the valley, by means of which a sufficiency of vegetables might be produced at a cheap rate, not only for Longwood and the camp, but also for the ships. Here, continued he, if water were brought by a conduit, Navarre, with the help of 2 or 3 Chinese, would produce a sufficiency of the vegetables which we so much want. How preferable would it be to dispose of the public money in conducting water to those poor soldiers in camp than in digging up ditches and throwing up fortifications around this house, just as if an army were coming to attack it? A man who has no regard for his soldiers ought never to have a command. The greatest necessity of the soldier is water. Sir Thomas Reed made a long harangue this day upon the impropriety of allowing Bonaparte any newspapers, unless such as had been previously inspected by the governor. The 18th saw Sir Hudson Lowe at Plantation House, found him busy in examining some newspapers for Longwood, several of which he put aside as not being, in his opinion, proper to be sent to Napoleon, observing to me at the same time that, however strange it might appear, General Bonaparte ought to be obliged to him for not sending him newspapers indiscriminately, as the perusal of articles written in his own favor might excite hopes which, when not ultimately realized, could not fail to afflict him. That, moreover, the British government thought it improper to let him know everything that appeared in the newspapers. 19th, Sir Thomas Reed, very busy in circulating reports in the town that General Bonaparte was sulky and would see nobody, that the governor was too good, and that the villain ought to be put in chains. The 21st, the David transport brought the news of the arrival of the Adolphus at the cave, laden chiefly with iron rails to surround Napoleon's house, for which the governor had sent to England. Sir Hudson Lowe came up to Longwood and inspected the works throwing up about the stables, and the sentinels he had placed held a long conversation with me afterwards about the restrictions and limits without coming to any determination. After having observed that I was responsible in some degree to ministers for any unfavorable impressions which might exist upon Napoleon's mind, His Excellency proceeded to catechize me relative to any conversations I would have with him. I hinted to him the peculiar delicacy of my situation and the impropriety and indeed impossibility that existed of my making the disclosures which he required. Sir Hudson said, did he admitted the peculiar delicacy of my situation, but at the same time I ought to make a full and ample disclosure to him, and to him only, of the language made use of by General Bonaparte, especially any abusive epithets. That it was necessary for him to know everything that passed. For a man who had so much intercourse with General Bonaparte, he thought I was less influenced by him than 99 out of 100 would have been. That my situation was of great importance, and one in which I could render great services. That absolute silence as to what was going on, except to him, was imperatively necessary, and indeed the chief requisite. His Excellency then told me in order, as he said, to show the good opinion that he entertained of me, that he had no scruple in affording me, that the commissioners were to be looked upon with great suspicion, that they were in fact spies upon everybody and everything, and only wanted to pick something out of me in order to send it to their courts. Then I had better be very cautious, as in all probability they would report to their employers everything that I had said, as they had already done of him, in proof of which he repeated to me the tenor of the conversation which I had held with Baron Sturm at Plantation House on the 21st of October, 1816, adding his satisfaction of having found that I had been cautious in my remarks. He also said that he had written to Lord Bathurst in a very favorable terms about me, and had recommended that my salary should be augmented to 500,000 per annum. After this, His Excellency acquainted me that he had received a letter from young Las Casas for me, which he would send in the evening. I received the above-mentioned letter under an enclosure containing one to General Gorgo from his mother, as Sir Hudson Lowe described it in his note, which I was directed to deliver to him. 24th, Mr. Vernon came up to Longwood to Undoye, baptize Count Bertrad's child. Napoleon played at billiards in the evening. The 25th, Cipriani in town purchasing provisions. 28th, Napoleon had very little rest during the night, got up at 5 o'clock and walked about in the billiard room for some time. Found him lying on his sofa, looked low and out of spirits, saluted me with a faint voice, gave him a Portsmouth paper of the 18th of November last, on reading some remarks made about the injury that was likely to accrue to the French interest by the marriage of the Emperor of Austria and the Princess of Bavaria, together with an observation that he, Napoleon, had prevented it. Even when in the plenitude of his power, Napoleon said, "C'est vrai, I was apprehensive of the consequences of the alliance between the two houses, but what signifies it now? Under the Bourbons, France will never be a first-rate power. There is no occasion to be afraid of her, as she will always be an inferior power under that house of blockheads." Averting to the commercial distress of England, he observed that Lord Castlereagh deserved the reprobation of the English nation for the little care which he had taken of their interests at the time of the general peace. "The misfortunes which befell me," said he, "gave such an ascendancy to England that almost any demand made by her would have been granted, independent of the right which she had to claim a recompense for the vast expense which she had been at. An opportunity offered itself which probably will never occur again, for England to recover and extricate herself from all her difficulties in a few years, and to relieve her from the immense load of debt which weighs her down. Had Castlereagh been really attentive to the interests of his own country, he would have embraced at an early period the only opportunity that had been presented to him to secure such commercial advantages to England as would have relieved her from her embarrassments. But instead of this, he only attended to paying his court to kings and emperors, who flattered his vanity by taking notice of him, well knowing that in doing so they gained the great point of making him neglect his country's interests, and consequently benefited their own. He was completely duped and will yet be cursed by your nation. I see no other way now," continued he, "to extricate you from your difficulties than by reducing the interest of the national debt, confiscating the greatest part of the revenues of the clergy, all the sinecures, diminishing considerably the army, and establishing a system of reduction altogether. Let those who want priests pay them. Your sinking fund is a humbug. Impose a heavy tax upon the absentees. It is too late now for you to make commercial treaties. What would then have been considered as only just and reasonable would now be thought far different. The opportunity's gone, and the nation is indebted to your imbeciles of ministers for all the calamities which will befall it, and which are solely to be attributed to their criminal neglect." "I understand," said he, "that the botanist is on the eve of departure without having seen me. In the most barbarous countries it would not be prohibited, even to a prisoner under sentence of death, to have the consolation of conversing with a person who had lately seen his wife and child. Even in that worst of courts, the Revolutionary Tribunal of France, such an instance of barbarity and of callousness to all feeling was never known, and your nation, which is so much cried up for liberality, permits such treatment. I am informed that this botanist has made an application to see me, which was refused. And in my letter to Las Casas, which was read by the governor, I complained of it as a hardship and thereby made application to see him. If I had asked it in any other manner, I should have exposed myself to the insult of a refusal from this bureau. Hangman, c'est le comble de la cruauté. He must indeed be a barbarian who would deny to a husband and a father the consolation of discoursing with a person who had lately seen, spoken to, and touched his wife and his child. Here Napoleon's voice faltered. From whose embrace he is forever separated by the cruel policy of a few. The anthropophagy of the South Seas would not practice it. Previous to devouring their victims, they would allow them the consolation of seeing and conversing with each other. The cruelties which are practiced here would be disavowed by cannibals. Napoleon now walked up and down for some time, much agitated. Afterwards he proceeded. You see the manner in which he endeavors to impose on the passengers going to England in order to make them believe that he is all goodness to me, and that it is my own fault if I do not receive strangers, that he interests himself so far as even to send up his own aide-de-camp to effect it, though he well knows this last circumstance would of itself be sufficient to prevent my receiving the person who he accompanied. His object now is to impress upon the minds of the public that I hate the sight of an Englishman. That is the reason he desired you to tell me that Las Casas had made me say that I abhorred the sight of the English uniform. I observed that Sir Hudson Lowe had also told me that he conceived it to be an invention of Las Casas. It is an invention of his own, replied the emperor, in order to impose upon you. If I had hated the English, should I have given myself up to them instead of going to the Emperor of Russia or of Austria? Is it possible that I could have given a greater proof of esteem for a nation than that which I have done for the English? Fortunately for myself. Napoleon now opened the door, called Saint-Denis, and in my presence asked him if in Las Casas' journal it was asserted that he, Napoleon, had ever said that he hated the sight of the English uniform or the English, or words of a similar tendency and meaning. Saint-Denis replied that nothing of the kind was contained in the journal. There, said Napoleon, if Las Casas had said so, it would have been in his journal. He must be wicked, who would torment me under the circumstances in which I am placed. He has got nothing here, continued Napoleon, placing his hand over his heart. And when there is nothing here, the head must be bad. He is a man unfit to command or to act for himself. Nature, in forming some men, intended that they should always remain in subaltern situation, such as Berthier. There was not in the world so good a chef d'état-major. But changed his occupation. He was not fit to command 500 men, a good scribbler like this man, an excellent commis. You may see how unfit for command he is when he allows himself to be led by the nose by such a contemptible imbecile as that Colonel Reed. Have you ever read Gil Blas? I replied that I had. That eternal smile on Reed's lips, rejoined Napoleon, is not natural and reminds me of Ambrose de Lamela, like Lamela's going to church while he was plotting to rob his master. It masks his real intentions. I have been informed, continued he, that the Balcombes were interrogated and cross-examined both by the governor and by his privy councillor Reed, touching what they had heard and seen at Longwood, and that the father replied that his daughters had come here to have the honor of visiting us and not as spies. March 1st, Napoleon conversed with me for some time relative to the iron railing said to have been brought out in the old edifice. I told him that it was customary in England to put rails around the country houses of a gentleman, at which he looked rather incredulous.